Good morning. It's Saturday, January 11th. And it's, I don't know, about 11:15 in the morning when you look at all the flowers on that mango tree. Hoping for a good year. And that little mango tree too. Supposed to be out here spraying them. There's two things that I treat these trees with. For white powdery mildew, we spray milk, a mixture of water and milk on the tree, and that kills the mildew. But we can't spray when it's so windy. And the other ailment these trees get is black spot mold, like rose bushes. For that, we spray copper side. It's just a copper solution, so it's not a poison, but it's still a metal. I don't like using that. We're gonna hold off on the copper until we have mold problem. We haven't had mold problems since I started hollowing out the middle of the tree so it can breathe better. So I think we've nipped the mold in the bush. I know I just said that expression wrong. Nip it in the bud. But we still have a problem with the white powdery mildew. And that happens when we have dry weather. But it's been raining, so I'm gonna hold off on spraying the milk. So that means I've got time to work on the bus. So we're gonna give this a little bit of sanding. And maybe we'll be fortunate enough to put some top coat on that today. I found out I had a kind of a major faux pas when I painted the door. The glass is in and adhered, bonded in very nicely with the silicone, by the way. So it's been taking forever to get really hard, and I can still even scratch it with my fingernail. It's not getting hard. And then it just occurred to me, I don't know, like, how long has it been? 2 weeks since I painted it. I forgot to put the hardener in the paint. So mad at myself. So I started sanding. I'm gonna sand it off. I could probably just paint over it. It might be okay, but I'm gonna sand it down till we get to like this, down to the primer. This was a fisheye here and there, and that little spot was a fisheye. But I want to get this sanded down, get most of this paint off, which kind of sucks because I kind of laid it on there thick. And what else sucks is now that I got the glass in here, it's got silicone, which I freaking hate, on the edge. So I'm just not sure how in the heck I'm going to get the paint to do what it needs to do on this edge. And if that silicone is contaminating the surface and going to cause me fish eyes. So, Jesus Christ, it's always something, man, you know? So I just went to the store, and, well, last night I had a piece of 400 grit sandpaper. Only had one piece, and it kept getting clogged up because the paint is still kind of gummy. And then once it would get gummed up, then you got these little areas of paint like that. Then these little things kind of break off into like little blobs and roll around and keep the paper from touching the paint. And then you also end up with, you can see it here, these little blotches is where the paint will stick back to itself. There's a spot. Because the paint is like kind of melting, even though you're doing it by hand. So actually I did this one spot with my vibrator orbital DA sander and a piece of, what grit is this? 220. This is not the piece. I tossed it over here. Might have even made it into the garbage can. I want to show you what happens to the sandpaper. There it is. See? when the paint sticks to the paper, now you got paint rubbing against paint instead of sandpaper rubbing on paint, and these are the high spots. So that causes the paint to melt, and it really trashes it. So wet sanding is the only thing that we can do here. Keeps it cool and lubricated. So I bought some 320 and I bought some 220 because the 400 I think was too fine for what we were doing. I probably should have bought some 400 too, but I was going to the hardware store by my house where it's really expensive. So this aluminum I need to sand down too, because it was sanded with that 220. I hit this with some of the, I think this was a piece of 600 that I had, and I want to get this to a shine, and you can see where, you know, it started to shine up a little bit here, but needs more sanding right there. So yeah, there's a lot of work left to do on this door. It's kind of discouraging, but we're gonna just leave that for now and see if we can get that door jamb painted. If we can get the door jamb painted, I feel good about that. All right, geez, this side is meeting my standards. What the problem looks like I'm discovering here is that when I put the Gorilla Construction adhesive in here as a caulk filler, I didn't wait long enough for it to cure before I put the paint on the top. So it sealed over the top of the construction adhesive, in areas where it was really thick. It just didn't cure it. It stayed soft and gummy. So this area from here down is where it was the worst. So I just took my wood chisel and used it as a scraper and scraped it all out of there until I got to up here. It seemed to be okay, and I just went all the way to the bottom. So just now I went and used my 91% isopropyl alcohol and a clean paper towel, and I wiped this down really good since we were wet sanding this earlier. So I figured the alcohol will help get rid of the water. And then I blew it out with compressed air real good. I'm gonna let that sit for a few hours. The top up here is good enough. And so, I mean, you can see where I sanded and took down the high sides practically down to the wood in some places. But that's okay. I'm okay with it. It's not an automotive finish, but that's all right too. It's kind of like a house woodwork finish. All right, so we're gonna let that sit and think of something else to do. So this is what a couple hours of sanding looks like. I was using 320 wet or dry. And I think 2 sheets. The first sheet I kind of just killed. And the second sheet, I was using my air compressor with the high pressure nozzle thing to blow the crud out of the paper that stuck to it. And it's kind of velvety smooth now. I think we could probably use a little bit more sanding here. But it's tough because I'm starting to break through the primer right here on the edge. There's a little bit of a swell right here. So I think I'm going to call that enough sanding. And like I was saying earlier, my intent was to get this red paint thin enough to where it won't dent or scratch with the hard paint on top of it. The bottom substrate could still yield, right? So these are the spots that the tape left, and I guess the primer was still soft too, because
Seems perfectly smooth now. Well, I could feel that one a little bit. So it looks like the dents in the finish were all the way down into the primer. I don't know how that masking tape could be so damaging. Yeah, that right there needs a little bit. I don't want to see any of this debauchery. Over here, right there, I need a little bit. I just got done washing this off and blowing it off with air and wiping it with my hand so I could get a good feel of what's going on right in that area right there. All right, let me put this thing away. I blew all the water out of the holes, so I'm gonna let this thing dry for a few days before I do anything. I think what I'll do is I'll pursue getting the aluminum polish supplies while I'm waiting for this to dry, and maybe put the shine on this. I don't know, I'm afraid to put anything on here that might get on top of this and damage my surface, contaminate my surface for painting. I'll think about that. Maybe I probably should have shined this up before I even began the paint, but then, you know, you run the risk of scratching it up. There's just so many catch-22s with all this stuff. It's so hard to figure out what the right order of operation is. There's all these little white dots that look like stars are where the primer had little dots and pimples on it before I put the top coat. So the top coat sanded all the way through. I'm still getting some. There's my fresh bead of caulk. All right, so what I did to make that come out so nice, earlier I cleaned that really well and wiped it down with isopropyl alcohol, let it thoroughly dry. And so just now I ran a very small bead of the caulk in there, not much bigger than what you see. Actually, no bigger than what you see, because I ended up with nothing left after I wiped it. But the trick is to wipe it. If you use the dry finger, it'll stick to your finger and you can never get a smooth finish in the fillet. So I wet my fingers with isopropyl alcohol, you know, liberal amount of, you know, thoroughly wet, not just dampened, but wet, and rub it on there, and then the caulk doesn't stick to you, and you could smooth it just as perfect as you want. And there you go, man. So this is caulking 2.0 in this area. So we're gonna give this a week to cure this time. Maybe not a week, but we're gonna give it plenty of time to cure. It's a small bead. What I had on there last time was kind of thick, and I think that's part of the reason why this area from here to the top part there, it didn't come out that well. All right, so I can live with that. So there'll be no painting this weekend. Well, I say that. That might be dry enough tomorrow if the weather's good. But I may or may not paint it tomorrow, just because I'm afraid to. I have to put a coat of primer on that. The other thing too is my paint has a lot of, my primer that I'm using has got a lot of solvents in it. So if this caulk I'm using is not thoroughly cured, the paint will attack it. I think actually, I think that was a demise of that area right there. That if you guys recall, I was using the paint with a lot of reducer in it. Here's the reducer I used. Actually, there's a leftover paint. So the paint was very, very thin. Okay, and I think with all those solvents in it is why it was attacking the caulking, and you know, a few things. The caulking wasn't fully cured and the paint was very aggressive. Wow, look at all that paint I sanded off today. Yeah, it's got a red tint all the way up the walk.